In the winter of 2019, a senior scientist quietly copied 30,000 research files onto an external drive. Within days, he had crossed the Pacific. Months later, a US Senate investigation catalogued this act among a broader portfolio of breaches tied to decades-long institutional planning. That single number, 30,000, is etched into the ledger of global science flows. But it barely scratches the surface of a bigger story. How did international science networks, built for collaboration, become pipelines of strategic advantage for one country? Most people assume scientific progress thrives on openness, academic conferences, co-authored papers, and student exchanges as the lifeblood of discovery. That logic is intuitive. Breakthroughs often emerge where minds converge across borders. International engagement should be a force for collective advancement, not a threat. But the conventional story misses a hidden lever, a systematic mechanism by which one nation channels intellectual capital and technology from collaborative networks into its own strategic ecosystem. For China, that mechanism was formalized through the Thousand Talents program. Consider Dr. Robert Chen, a physicist at a US research university. In the early 2010s, he was approached with an invitation, a prestigious title, generous funding, and an adjunct appointment at a major Chinese institution. He was told the goal was to bring back expertise and contribute to China's scientific rise. At the time, Chen signed contracts that later investigations would describe as legally opaque, restricting disclosure of foreign affiliations, clauses incompatible with US norms. Chen saw no contradiction. Dual appointments were increasingly common. It was another avenue to fund important work. This microstory reflects a structural pattern. Officially launched in 2008, the Thousand Talents program was framed as a brain drain reversal, bringing back Chinese scholars from abroad. But over time, it evolved into a pipeline capable of attracting and redistributing knowledge assets globally. Its architecture is simple, multi-tiered recruitment categories offering titles, salaries, and research support. Full-time returnees were prioritized early, but by 2010, part-time appointments allowed scientists to maintain overseas positions while holding funded Chinese roles. In supply chain terms, these were parallel nodes embedded in existing networks, sharing incentives and infrastructure with both host and sponsor. Contracts bound these nodes. US researchers often unknowingly signed agreements with non-disclosure clauses and obligations to share research with Chinese institutions. US counterintelligence assessments warned that some clauses conflicted with American university disclosure norms and intellectual property rules. Two mechanisms sustained this system. First, accumulation, attracting individuals with critical expertise using money, prestige, and research infrastructure. Estimates suggest over 7,000 professionals have been recruited under the Thousand Talents umbrella and its successor programs from universities and labs across the US, Europe, and beyond. Second, entrenchment, embedding these scientists as integrated nodes in a strategic network through contracts, funding streams, and dual contribution expectations. Research outputs, data, and even human capital flowed along pre-configured paths invisible to the original funding source. From a distance, these channels resemble academic exchange, but the pipeline metaphor reveals a key insight. Knowledge was not merely shared, it was siphoned along engineered routes. The program was not spontaneous, it was a designed network with defined nodes and traffic rules. US governance systems began to strain under this architecture. Grant agencies like the NIH and NSF require disclosure of foreign affiliations and funding. These requirements are checkpoints, ensuring transparency about support and conflicts of interest. Yet participants in Chinese talent programs often failed to report dual appointments, sometimes violating university policies and federal grant rules. The friction wasn't just foreign appointments, it was misaligned reporting systems, incentives, and legal frameworks. Universities depend on external funding, federal grants fuel research. The Chinese talent network created an alternative supply chain, intersecting and sometimes obscuring established channels. By the late 2010s, US policymakers recognized that the Thousand Talents network was a systemic conduit reshaping research itself. Senate hearings in 2019 outlined cases where talent program members removed sensitive lab files, filed patents under foreign company names, and recruited other participants into sensitive areas. This is a broader pattern of global science. Advanced economies liberalized academic systems, welcoming foreign researchers and students as engines of innovation. The US, with world-class universities and open borders for graduate study, became a dominant magnet. But openness created vulnerabilities. Other actors built incentives to channel knowledge back into competitive ecosystems. In Europe and Canada, similar concerns arose around foreign research partnerships. China's approach was unique. Enormous state resources combined with targeted recruitment integrated into long-term strategic planning. The Thousand Talents pipeline mirrors Cold War-era science diplomacy, but is far subtler. Then, mechanisms were overt. Embargoes, exchanges tied to state policy, national labs behind firewalls. Now, dual appointments, transnational publications, and digital collaboration make networks porous. The program exploited that porosity, redirecting knowledge along invisible channels. Across geographies, a recurring pattern emerges. Where institutional transparency is weak and incentives misaligned, networks designed for cooperation can be repurposed into strategic influence channels. Energy markets, semiconductor supply chains, scientific research. The structural lesson is consistent. Systems optimized for exchange without governance checkpoints are vulnerable to unintended value flows. The consequences unfold quietly. Over a decade, US universities grappled with compliance violations and questions of governing foreign collaborations in a world where science drives economic competitiveness. Agencies tightened disclosure requirements. Universities expanded compliance offices. Top researchers sometimes avoided dual affiliations due to bureaucratic complexity. Others migrated to Europe or Australia, seeking lower regulatory friction. Meanwhile, the Chinese ecosystem absorbed and repurposed talent and insights delivered through these nodes. Strategic planning documents emphasize innovation in quantum computing, biotechnology, and AI. Though the Thousand Talents name was officially suppressed, the structural mechanisms continue under rebranded programs. The quiet result: collaboration and competition are entangled. Pipelines that once carried open knowledge now channel research conditioned by university norms, federal disclosure rules, and foreign recruitment contracts. There are no simple valves to close. These infrastructures are deeply embedded in global science networks. The unresolved question lingers: can global research remain open when powerful actors build parallel incentive networks, reshaping the flow of talent and technology? The Thousand Talents architecture shows how structural leverage, through contracts, institutional alignments, and long-term incentives, can redirect knowledge without dramatic ruptures. The pipeline still runs, invisible, yet shaping where ideas travel, how networks form, and the rules governing global science. In that quiet tension lies a deeper reflection on cooperation itself, an ongoing pattern, unresolved, and shaping the future. By the early 2020s, the consequences of the Thousand Talents program were impossible to ignore. It wasn't just individual cases of scientists copying files or failing to disclose affiliations. It was an entire ecosystem quietly reshaping the global research landscape. For the United States, this meant that the very openness that had powered its universities and innovation engine had become a structural vulnerability. Universities began to notice patterns. Labs that had long thrived on collaboration were now facing subtle competition from networks that operated outside traditional reporting lines. Research funding, once tightly monitored, was intersecting with foreign channels. Experiments, datasets, and even human talent were subtly redirected. It was as if a parallel research network had formed alongside the official channels, and it was deeply embedded in the global system. The US government responded, but cautiously. Federal agencies ramped up disclosure requirements. Universities invested in compliance offices. The FBI and Department of Justice launched investigations. In some cases, scientists were charged with fraud or theft of intellectual property. But these were piecemeal measures. reactive rather than systemic. The network had already been built. Contracts were signed. Research infrastructures had shifted. The pipeline kept flowing. Meanwhile, China was patient. The country didn't need headlines or public victories. Its strategy was subtle, long-term, and almost invisible. Every researcher recruited, every lab collaboration initiated, every technology insight quietly transferred was a building block in a larger architecture of strategic advantage. China's state planning documents reveal the endgame. By cultivating global talent and embedding it into Chinese research ecosystems, the nation could leapfrog competitors in key sectors like AI, quantum computing, biotechnology, and aerospace. The implications are staggering. Consider the AI sector. Algorithms developed in US labs often rely on datasets, experimental insights, or methods that are part of international collaborations. When those insights enter Chinese research nodes, legally or through dual appointments, their utility amplifies. Projects accelerate, patents are filed in China, and technological edge shifts subtly but decisively. By the mid-2020s, several US-born innovations had contributed to breakthroughs in China, sometimes without the original institutions fully aware of the flow. It's not just a story about science, it's about global strategic power. Scientific innovation drives economic competitiveness, defense capabilities, and national influence. By quietly integrating talent from abroad, China has essentially been building a parallel research ecosystem, one that benefits from global openness without adhering to the same transparency and governance standards. Some critics call it espionage, others call it talent theft, but structurally, it's more than that. It's a network effect. Each node reinforces the others. Each researcher embedded in the system becomes a conduit for ideas, methods, and technological insight. It's not about one scandal or one stolen file. It's about decades of institutional leverage, quietly shaping the global innovation race. For the United States, the challenge is existential. The nation thrives on open science, but the very structures that enable collaboration now enable strategic siphoning. Closing the pipeline is not simple. Universities cannot shut down international collaboration. They would destroy the ecosystem that made them leaders in research. Yet leaving it open risks continuing talent and knowledge flows to competitors. It's a structural tension with no easy solution. The global implications go even further. Other countries are watching. Europe, Canada, and Australia have started tightening disclosure rules, funding safeguards, and dual appointment policies. Yet the effectiveness is uneven. Open science is difficult to regulate without stifling innovation. And meanwhile, the nodes embedded in China's ecosystem continue to operate. Each innovation, each insight, each collaboration adds to a cumulative advantage. There's also a human dimension. Scientists face ethical and bureaucratic dilemmas. Dual appointments are lucrative, prestigious, and professionally rewarding. But failing to disclose foreign affiliations can end careers. Some researchers choose compliance, others choose opportunity. The result is a subtle shift in where talent flows, what research priorities emerge, and which institutions gain long-term advantage. By 2025, analysts began describing the thousand talents effect as strategic talent leverage. It's no longer about isolated breaches, it's about structural influence. The program created pathways that can reshape sectors, countries, and even the global innovation order. For China, it's a blueprint. Build patience into strategy, leverage openness, and embed influence where it is least visible but most effective. The question now is not whether this strategy worked, it already has. The question is how the West responds. Can universities reconcile openness with protection? Can governments balance collaboration with national security? Can policymakers design systems that allow exchange without ceding strategic advantage? Some solutions are emerging. The US has proposed expanded disclosure requirements, targeted sanctions, and more aggressive oversight of dual appointments. Universities are rethinking collaborations and grant structures. But these measures are defensive, not transformative. China's strategy is proactive, patient, and designed to outlast short-term policy cycles. Meanwhile, the pipeline continues. New talent programs, rebranded yet structurally identical, recruit and embed researchers. Dual appointments, joint labs, and international collaborations quietly feed the network. Innovations in AI, biotech, quantum computing, and advanced materials flow along channels partially invisible to US institutions. The cumulative effect is subtle but decisive. China steadily narrows the technological gap in sectors that underpin economic and military competitiveness. And the final takeaway is stark. Global science is no longer just a collaborative enterprise. It has become a strategic battleground with ideas, talent, and technology as the currency of power. The Thousand Talents program demonstrates how long-term strategy, structural leverage, and patient execution can quietly shape outcomes on a global scale. The flow of knowledge continues, invisible yet powerful, threading through labs, universities, and research networks. Open science persists, but it now carries hidden consequences. For policymakers, scientists, and institutions, the question remains: can the rules of collaboration be rewritten to protect both openness and competitiveness? Or will the architecture of global research quietly favor those who designed it with patience, precision, and vision? In the end, the Thousand Talents pipeline is not a story of scandal alone. It's a story of structural strategy, global influence, and the quiet reshaping of the world order, one researcher, one lab, and one insight at a time. And for anyone watching closely, the question is no longer hypothetical. What comes next may define who leads the 21st century.